Easter bombings. As ISIS claims responsibility, the death toll rises to nearly 360 people. What the Sri Lankan president is doing. Faith-based groups are battling the opioid drug abuse crisis, and today President Trump is weighing in. We'll have a report from the White House. A new chapter. Pro-life supporter Abby Johnson says God loves a good conversion story. Her reaction to the unexpected success of Unplanned. And it's a dirty job. How an artist in Italy is paying homage to Leonardo da Vinci on the 500th anniversary of his death. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 24th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. There are new details in the Easter bombing terror strike in Sri Lanka. But first, news of a possible attack, this one at the heart of the Catholic faith. A man accused of entering St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City last week with gasoline cans, lighter fluid, and lighters, had also booked a hotel room near the Vatican. Police say Mark Lamparello purchased a ticket on a flight to Rome for the day after his foiled attack in New York. He planned to stay at a hotel 20 minutes from St. Peter's Basilica. New York prosecutors contend Lamparello planned to burn down St. Patrick's and had spent considerable time planning the strike. He remains under psychiatric care. Sri Lanka's president promises to shake up the country's top security establishment. This follows the Easter Sunday church and hotel bombings that killed more than 350 people. Officials there failed to act on international intelligence reports warning of possible terrorist acts. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee brings us the latest from outside of the Embassy of Sri Lanka in Washington, D.C. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. We're also learning more about the attack's suicide bombers. Investigators in Sri Lanka are looking into whether or not they may have pledged allegiance to ISIS. Now, officials describe many of the bombers as highly educated. ISIS itself is claiming responsibility for the attacks, but it's not clear if the bombers got any help from outside of the island nation. Sri Lanka's police and military continue the hunt for terrorists connected to the Easter Sunday bombings. Officials say they've arrested 60 people in connection to the attack on 3 churches and 4 hotels, but warn people connected to the attacks are still on the run and have explosives.
Right now we are asking people to be vigilant, but I think within the couple of days, within next few days, we will have the situation totally under control.
New surveillance video shows one of the 9 suspected suicide bombers just before he attacked St. Sebastian Catholic Church in a small seaside village. The suspect, wearing a large backpack, is seen in the church courtyard, passing by a little girl and her father. A camera inside the church shows him entering the open doors just before setting off the explosive. Family members are still mourning their loved ones who died in the coordinated attacks. This man lost his son, his daughter-in-law, and their children, who were attending Easter Mass at St. Anthony's Shrine in the country's capital.
5 children, all are boys. I can't bear this on my head. I can't bear.
He says the killers must be found. ISIS has released a photo of the man the Sri Lankan government has identified as the leader of the Easter attacks. The country's president asked for the resignations of the defense secretary and the national police chief after an intelligence lapse. Sri Lanka's neighbor, India, had warned authorities multiple times this month that there were planned terrorist attacks on churches. One warning on April 4th, one on April 11th, and reportedly one just hours before the first bomb was detonated. Some Sri Lankan officials claimed to have received information the Easter bombings were in retaliation for the shooting massacre at 2 New Zealand mosques last month. But the New Zealand Prime Minister says they have not received any indication the attacks are connected. We've also learned from the U.S. Embassy in Sri Lanka that the FBI agents are in the country helping with the investigation. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from outside the Embassy of Sri Lanka. Thank you, Wyatt. A judge in Oregon says he intends to partially block a pro-life policy change by the Trump administration. The president is trying to cut off federal funding for providers who refer patients for an abortion. The judge made his statement after hearing 3 hours of arguments in a lawsuit brought by 20 states and Washington, D.C. The suit says the proposal is an attack on Planned Parenthood and a violation of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. An editorial in today's Washington Post accuses the pro-life movement of taking on extreme and unconstitutional methods. It says in part, quote, "Never mind that many states devoting energy, time, and money to enacting and defending these abortion bans suffer from terrible health outcomes for women. The term pro-life does not seem to encompass concern for those endangered lives." But the head of the Knights of Columbus points to recent polls saying pro-abortion laws are not what Americans want.
80% of the American public is against this kind of legislation, and even higher numbers in the state of New York, believe it or not. So these are outliers. The country is moving in a very strong pro-life direction.
Supreme Knight Carl Anderson was speaking to me yesterday during our live broadcast of the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast here in Washington, D.C. A report says former Vice President Joe Biden will launch his presidential campaign tomorrow. The 76-year-old is likely to be the frontrunner in a crowded field of Democrats vying for the White House in 2020. Biden, a Catholic, is a supporter of abortion rights, though earlier in his career he voted in favor of limiting abortion. If Democrats try to impeach President Trump, here's what he says. He's taking the case to the Supreme Court, but the High Court ruled in 1993 it doesn't play a role in impeachment proceedings. For the president's latest reaction to that and the Russia investigation fallout, we go to White House correspondent Mark Irons. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. In addition to that Supreme Court threat, the president is addressing the nation's opioid crisis, and we have more reaction tonight on the attack on Christians in Sri Lanka. But first, the president now says he'll fight Democrats' efforts to bring former White House lawyer Don McGahn before Congress to answer more questions about the wrapped-up Russia investigation.
I thought after 2 years, we'd be finished with it. No, now the House goes and starts subpoenaing. It was the most thorough investigation probably in the history of our country. I think I read where they interviewed 500 people. I say it's enough.
But Democrats want to know more, asking if the president illegally interfered in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Mueller lays out possible instances of obstruction in his completed report,
which has produced evidence that tells us that this president and his administration engaged in obstruction of justice.
The president denied that before flying to Atlanta today. At a drug abuse summit, he said progress has been made in fighting the opioid epidemic.
Critical to this effort is my administration's strong support for faith-based initiatives.
Opioid abuse claimed nearly 48,000 American lives in 2017. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, is leading White House efforts on the opioid crisis. On a different topic today, she reacted to President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who called the victims of Sunday's attack in Sri Lanka Easter worshipers instead of Christians.
I would say that ISIS was responsible for an attack on Christians, since I was an Easter worshiper that very day, but I am a Christian every day. I don't know why we can't get former President Obama, never President Hillary Clinton, to just say that in a tweet or elsewise. I don't know why.
And rounding things off here, the White House is also addressing border security today. In a tweet, President Trump says he's sending armed soldiers to the border. Lauren?
He's also threatening to shut down a section of it. What prompted this?
Well, in another tweet, the president is talking about another migrant caravan partially apprehended in Mexico. He says if Mexico doesn't completely stop that caravan, the section of border they are traveling to will be closed. Now, we have heard the president make these threats before, so we'll see what happens, as the president says. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. North Korea's leader arrives in Russia ahead of his summit tomorrow with Vladimir Putin. Kim Jong-un appeared in an upbeat mood as he arrived via an armored train in the far eastern part of the country. He and the Russian president will meet tomorrow in Vladivostok. They will discuss ridding Pyongyang of its nuclear weapons and bringing peace to the Korean peninsula. It's Kim's first trip to the country since he became North Korea's leader. Fighting in Libya's capital has reached a center holding hundreds of detained migrants and refugees. United Nations-backed forces are shown here targeting the Libyan National Army militia. The fighting has killed nearly 300 people and 30,000 have been displaced. An international media report says Pope Francis could soon create a new Vatican department dedicated to evangelizing. Vida Nueva, a weekly Catholic magazine in Spain, says the Holy Father is planning on establishing a super dicastery for evangelization, and that would be even more important than the centuries-old Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. He joins us now from Rome. Alan, this is part of the Holy Father's effort to reform the Vatican. According to this report, what would the department do? Why does Pope Francis want to do this?
Well, Vida Nueva is reporting, Lauren, that the Pope wants to unify two departments for evangelization, that of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, which is for mission territories in the world, think Africa, Asia, Oceania, and the other is for the re-evangelization of the Western world, secularized countries. It's called the Pontifical Council for Promoting the New Evangelization. So the idea would be that these two will come together and create one mega dicastery, is what they're calling it, which dicastery is the Vatican word for department. So it's going to be another big department within the Vatican. This has happened throughout this ongoing reform in Pope Francis's pontificate. We've seen other Vatican councils come together and form bigger departments than they were. What's different about this is that it's really putting a lot of, it's putting a priority on evangelization for the Pope. He's always talked about it. This would give it an extra boost.
Alan Holdren, you've been covering Rome for years. What would this new department mean for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith?
Well, that same report, Lauren, said that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith would take a lower role on the totem pole, so to speak, within the Vatican underneath this evangelization department. All of these Vatican departments serve to help the Pope in his mission to confirm the faith in the world and to protect the faith. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has been in place since the 16th century. To say that it would be supplanted completely by an evangelization department, I don't think is the case.
Doesn't sound like it. According to other reports, Pope Francis could even elevate new cardinals in June. What are you hearing? When could that be, and what's the status of the College of Cardinals right now?
Well, they're saying that that could come around the 25th, the June the 25th to 27th meetings that have been called for the Pope's C9 Cardinals group, the council of now 6 cardinals, which was originally 9. And it's happening at a strange time. It's never happened towards the end of a month before. It's always been in the first couple of weeks. In this case, it will be just before the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a major feast, the patrons of Rome. It's also the day that metropolitan archbishops, so archbishops of major cities of the world, come to Rome to receive what's called a pallium, a special vestment from the Pope. And it's also been, in the last 2 years, 2017 and 18, a time for a consistory for new cardinals. So to think that all of those things would take place through that week is something that seems very practical. The Pope turns to his College of Cardinals for advice, but also in the case where you have a resignation of a Pope or the death of a Pope, this will be the group that will elect a new Pope. So the Pope is constantly replenishing this group. There are 120 right now, which is the limit. Before the end of the year, we'll be down to 114. So it seems like it's a possibility.
Well, it sounds like that week in June, that late week in June, is going to be very busy for you. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, the White House strikes down a pro-abortion provision in a UN resolution. Co-founder of a Catholic Healthshare ministry shares his personal story and speaks out about the dangers of aid in dying laws. Chief Operating Officer Chris Faddis was inspired to start the Solidarity Healthshare ministry after caring for his terminally ill wife, Angela, during her battle with stage 4 colon cancer. And Chris Faddis joins me now. Chris, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me what it was like caring for your late wife that motivated you to start this new initiative.
You know, I think seeing the community come together around our family was a big part of it, how the community came and helped us to pay for her care, to support us. This kind of band of angels, so to speak, that came around us, you know, to redo her room before we went home for hospice care and everything else. That really showed that we thought there's got to be a model in this that we can center healthcare around that kind of community concept.
We have seen a lot, Chris Faddis, of aid in dying laws right now being passed around the country. Now, New Jersey is the latest state to do it. Cardinal Tobin of Newark has spoken out against this new law that Governor Phil Murphy put together. he says this: whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of disabled, sick, or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable. What are your concerns about the pressures that this places on people like yourself?
Yeah. You know, I think, first of all, I think we have to think about the dying person and what's happening when they're going through that process, when they're being told they're terminal. The first concern you hear from almost everybody, right, is I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a pain. Or you hear things like, I don't want to see her suffer. I don't want to see him suffer. And when we put something in front of somebody that gives them an easy way out, we're actually saying to them, look, you know, we love you, but your life is expendable. And I think it puts pressure on that person. I remember, even though Angela had myself and tons of family around her, the feeling she had often of being a burden. And so we had to constantly remind her, you're not a burden, you're a blessing. With this time, there's purpose here. And in allowing the mercy to allow her to take time to die as opposed to hastening her death, we allowed great things to happen in her life for her to truly be prepared to meet her Maker.
As the COO of a Catholic Healthshare ministry, you must have found ways that are effective ways of communicating exactly what you're saying about speaking out in a positive way for palliative care.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We certainly have to advocate, and we need to be active at the state level with these aid and dying laws. But I think it's really important that we as Catholics think about solutions. So for us, you know, we look very closely at care management. So when we have somebody who's terminally ill, how are we caring for them? How are we supporting their family through that process? And we want to be able to do even more of that, right?
You mean like hospice? Is that what you're saying?
Hospice, palliative care, but also guiding them in those decisions.
So you know, spiritually.
Spiritually, you know, helping the family make decisions. When Angela was dying, I had good friends who were up on understanding the church's teachings, who were able to guide me, doctors, lawyers, who helped me walk through those decisions. And so that's something we do for our members. It's something we offer to them to support them. But I think as a church, it's something that we all need to begin doing, because there's not the support that's needed to help the family through that process.
Well, it's always great to talk to you, Chris, about this, even though it's a terribly sad
It's a sad topic,
yeah. All right, well, thank you so much, Chris Faddis, Chief Operating Officer of Solidarity Health.
Thank you.
The United States removes references to sexual and reproductive health services from a United Nations resolution condemning sexual violence.
13 votes in favor, 0 votes against.
The resolution passed yesterday, but only after the United States threatened to withhold support for the measure as it was originally written. The early drafts included references to providing sexual and reproductive health care to survivors of rape and abuse. Up next, Pope Francis reveals the most important gift we receive from God. And Abby Johnson tells us about her conversion from a Planned Parenthood employee to an unplanned movie success story.
Pensiamo noi se siamo capaci di perdonare.
During his weekly talk with pilgrims today, the Holy Father asked the faithful to reflect on forgiveness. He says, if we do not forgive, God will not forgive us. The Pope reminds us that we can ask God for the strength to do so. As the pro-life movie Unplanned continues its success at the box office, the real-life inspiration for the movie, Abby Johnson, says money and fame weren't her motivation.
This is why we decided to do Unplanned, for the conversion of hearts. It wasn't for the money. It wasn't to make Abby Johnson a household name. I don't care about any of that. This is to make God's story and his radical mercy something that is known to every single household in this country and in this world.
Johnson came to Washington yesterday to address the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. She joined me and Jason Calvi as we hosted that prayer breakfast coverage on EWTN. We have Abby Johnson, whose autobiography Unplanned is now on the big screen. For our viewers who have not seen the movie, tell us about it.
Sure. So I did work for Planned Parenthood for 8 years. I was a clinic director at one of their facilities outside of the Houston affiliate, and left in October of 2009 after witnessing a live ultrasound-guided abortion procedure of a 13-week-old unborn child, and seeing that child fight and struggle for his life during the abortion process showed me that I could no longer pretend that there wasn't humanity in the womb, that life wasn't there, and I could no longer pretend that the rights of this child didn't matter. And so I ended up leaving and have been speaking out ever since about my own experiences inside of the clinic, but also really trying to help facilitate healing for those who have been touched by abortion in some way.
And now you are pregnant with?
Number 8.
How wonderful is that?
Yes.
And your organization, and then there were none, has helped, what, some 500
over
people
500.
that worked in abortion clinics. Tell us about that work.
Yeah, we've helped over 500 abortion clinic workers, doctors, nurses, all the above, leave the industry and come to faith in Christ and a new line of employment and healing. And, you know, that's so much what the Catholic Church is about, you know, is bringing healing to those who have been affected and just loving them with Christ's compassion.
Well, the movie did tremendously well on your opening day weekend, and you did have some problems, however, with social media.
We did, yeah. We had a little trouble with Twitter, suspending our account and then dropping all of our followers. But you know what? It's fine. God works all things for good, and we were told that at the very beginning in prayer time, that any attacks that came upon us would only be used to glorify God in His name. And now our Twitter account on Unplanned Movie has more followers than Planned Parenthood. So we feel like that was a success.
What is it like to be Catholic now, to have entered the Catholic Church?
You know, I tell people the Catholic Church and the sacraments of the Church and the saving grace of the Church is what really, it saved my marriage, it saved my family. It brought me to a deeper understanding of who Jesus is. I don't know where I'd be today without the sacraments and the faith of the Church. And we look at converts all across the country who have entered the Catholic Church, who have found that healing presence of Christ in the Church through the Eucharist. And gosh, there's just nothing better.
Thank you so much, Abby Johnson. You're a pro-life activist. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Finally tonight, an artist in Italy is marking the 500th anniversary of the death of Leonardo da Vinci with a tractor. Dario Gambarin, the so-called land artist, turned 10 miles of his parents' farmland in Verona, Italy, I wonder what they're saying about that, into a likeness of Da Vinci, complete with the date 1519, and that's the year Da Vinci died. It took 8 hours to complete it. That's it? 8 hours? I'd be there for 8 days. If you want to see this, it's in the northern part of Italy. You better act fast. He says in the coming day, the sketch will be plowed over so the land can be cultivated for crops. People do interesting things, don't they? For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.